Okay, so today we'll talk a little bit about the leg position and how it comes from the pelvis, and how having a good leg position can actually help the horse be more forward, more centered, or calmer in general. So if you have your neutral pelvis, which again, as we discussed in the first video I made, is basically where your pelvis is just kind of straight up and down, so not rotated back or forward, then your hip joint can let your femur hang down in a nice position. So you've probably heard people talk about riding as if you are standing on your own 2 feet. So that would look like this. So if I'm in a neutral pelvis, then my femur can come right out of my pelvis in this nice position, and then my heel can land right behind my hip, right underneath my hip. So I have the alignment that we always talk about, which is to have your head, your shoulder, your hip, and your heel on the same line, right? So if I go too far back, I lose my balance. If I go too far forward, I lose my balance. Now, one of the most common things that people do on horses that are not forward, so the horse is resistant or slow or sluggish, is they hook their heel into the horse in an effort to try and nudge and squeeze and make forward motion. And what that does is it actually closes off the pelvis, closes off the hip angle, it closes off the horse's ability to go forward. So if you look at me in that position that I just showed you, my femurs, my thighs, come parallel to the horse. The barrel of the horse would be here, and they're parallel to the horse, which makes my heels actually parallel to the horse's side, right? So that's a position where my seat bones and my hips can actually guide the horse into a forward motion. So I can ride in my own balance, I can guide the horse forward. Now, the minute I turn my heels in, what happens is if you put your hands underneath your seat bones, and you rotate your heels in, you're gonna feel, first thing is your hip angle is kind of gonna grind out, and your seat bones are going to pinch together. So rather than having your seat bones level, they come in like this. And the first thing that I feel in this position is strain. I feel strain here. I'm not going to be able to roll my hip forward in the motion of the horse. I'm actually going to be swiveling side to side. And I actually see that in a lot of my students who ride what I call the frog leg, is they swivel side to side a lot instead of going forward and through with the horse. Now, the second thing that does is that raises my center of gravity, okay? So if I'm on my horse and I have my pelvis neutral, then my thigh falls out of my hip like so. I can't get my feet on the ground because this thing's not high enough. But this is a position where my hip flexor can be open and I can follow the motion through, right? So my center of gravity is congruent with the horse. I have a low center of gravity and very stable. Now, the minute I turn my heels in, what happens is I actually raise my center of gravity. So you can watch me come up in the saddle. And what that does is as I'm riding like this, I'm going to bump along up and down instead of forward and through. So that's going to make the horse's motion and mine incongruent. And that's going to make the horse very restricted. That's going to make the horse feel incapable of moving fluidly. The other thing it does is it closes the horse's back. So as I do this, I bring my femur and my hip, my hip ball and socket joints. I end up doing this. So now my hip flexor has to close and my heels are dug into the horse's side. My leg aids are no longer effective because I've taken my thigh off. So there's this big open gap here. And now I have to squeeze upward constantly or inward constantly. And even worse is if I use one leg versus the other, then I actually tip onto one seat bone and then the other, which makes my ribs tip more one than the other, which makes my core completely ineffective, which means I am forced to ride hand and leg and can't use my seat. So this frog leg thing makes us actually incapable of keeping the horse forward without artificially driving the horse forward. In other words, the horse cannot use its own energy in an alignment. We have to constantly make it. One of the trickiest things for riders that are stuck in this pattern is they feel like if they take their leg off, the horse will not go. So they nudge, 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 nudge. And one of the reasons is because the rider's seat is actually blocking that forward motion. And that's one of the most interesting things to see, is how two riders can create two very different horses. As a rider in an open seat can get that horse to move, whereas a rider in a closed seat will have trouble keeping that horse forward and will have to constantly threaten with an exterior aid to get that horse to go. The other thing about this leg is the heel constantly grinding into the horse's side is going to cause the horse's ribs to contract in self-defense. You know, it would be like somebody having you nudge, 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 nudge. You're going to end up contracting so that you protect yourself, and that actually limits range of motion. So the horse who is being ridden by the rider who is nudge, 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 nudge is going to actually restrict their range of motion in self-defense, and to protect their ribs from this grindy, grindy, grindy. And so the horse is going to actually lose the capacity to go forward. So that's the irony of the horse that is not forward, is the long draped leg actually creates forward motion for that horse as opposed to the constant driving leg. So that's something for you to think about today. That doesn't mean don't use your leg. It means that when you use your leg, you're using it in congruence with your pelvis and your core, so that the horse can understand that when you give a drive aid, you are not blocking it with your pelvis.